Welcome back to another episode of The Hit. My name is James Layton, CEO and founder of Anderson James. This is the podcast where every single week I bring you a leader from our sector to discuss some of the biggest challenges in UK housing today. Today on The Hit, we were delighted to be joined by Fiona Fletcher-Smith, Group Chief Executive Officer at L&Q. We talk about Fiona's background and the leadership journey she's been on to get to L&Q. We also talk around their development plans, major works investment programme. We talk about the amalgamation of Trafford Housing Trust into the L&Q family. And we also find out all about the G15 and Fiona's aim within the role. I hope you enjoy the episode. And if you do, I'd ask that you like and subscribe so we can reach as many people as possible. Fiona, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Delighted to be here on such a miserable, wet day.
Well, you say
where you are.
Yeah, you're saying that, and I'm looking at blue skies for once in Manchester. It's 90% rain, I think, most of the time.
Oh, well, it's either coming your way or you've just missed it, but it is horrible down south.
Only the opposite. But thank you for doing this. Appreciate your time. As we always like to start, do you mind just give us a bit of an introduction of yourself, your organisation, a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Fiona Fletcher-Smith and I am Group Chief Executive for L&Q Group. And for 2 years, I am the current chair of London's G15 group of large housing associations. And actually, can I put a plug in here? If anyone's got a better name than G15, please drop me a line, because it doesn't really do what it says on the tin. But there are only 11 of us for a start.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've never thought of it that way actually, but yeah, better name. Any of that in the comments, please. But obviously, you've had quite the career in housing. Just give us a bit of a potted history. Just give us an overview of how you got into it and how you're still in it, I suppose.
Yeah, so it is. I mean, if I say probably 30, 35 years in it now, it makes me feel very, very old. But I grew up in small town Ireland, where actually housing wasn't really a thing, because everybody had their own house or had a field they could build a house in. And it was only when I went to work for Dublin City Corporation, having dropped out of university, that I realised that not everybody was as well housed as we were in small town rural Ireland. And it was just fascinating to be involved with that. But it was a lucky break for me, because I went into the HR department on day one. I was, I think, recruited as an admin officer. And the guy in HR had 2 envelopes and he said, "Here, pick one." So the one I picked happened to be the housing department, and off I went. The second one he told me was vehicle licensing, which could have been an entirely different and very dull career by the sound of it. No offence to anyone who works in DVLA or I started there, and what was interesting to me was that having dropped out of university, I was keen to go back at some stage. So I took a career break from the corporation in Dublin after about, I think, 3 years, came over to the UK, started working in housing in London, then did my degree in surveying and a master's degree in housing after that. And it was just such an interesting thing to work in the UK, because the housing situation was so much more difficult, so the problems more acute. And I got addicted. And 35 years later, here I am, still addicted to fixing it.
Love it. What's been some of the fundamental things that have changed in that time, would you say? What have been some of the real key milestones and things you've seen that's changed, or are we still broadly in the same spot we were when you got in it 35 years ago?
I think in the recent probably 10 to 15 years, what I have seen is the problems are far more acute and intractable now. What I have seen is the growth of poverty, like complete poverty. There were no food banks when I was a housing officer in the late 80s, early 90s. It just wasn't a thing. Now food banks, we have our own. We work with food banks as a housing association. There was a lot more choice. I remember working in a South London borough, Lambeth, where we had hard to let flats in London, walking distance of Zone 1 of London, where, we just give them to anybody who'd be prepared to pay rent. There just, for some parts of our borough, there were no waiting lists.
Wow.
And now you look at, obviously from a G15 point of view, to give you a London figure, There's 170,000 people in temporary accommodation in London today. That's the equivalent size of the city of Oxford.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's been getting worse and worse and worse over a number of decades, and particularly over the last 10 to 15 years, it's got a lot worse and a lot more difficult to fix.
Yeah, and I suppose you can see that, I don't know London, but like homelessness is becoming massive in Manchester to the point of we're going to have to do something really significant to fix that. I'm sure we'll come on to that through the Trafford story, but certainly from my perspective, the needs starting to get really, really out of hand. When did that start, do you think? When did it really start to ramp up to those kind of levels of numbers? Because 170,000 is almost untenable, isn't it?
Yeah. The last 12 months have been particularly bad.
Right.
The figures in Manchester are crazy too. I think the last time I looked, it was about 7,000 people in Manchester in temporary accommodation, which is unheard of. Absolutely unheard of. And I was looking at some figures yesterday with the Greater London Authority and London councils, and the use of bed and breakfast, which we all thought we were out of years ago, because it's an awful way to bring up a family. So we have a government guidance on not staying in bed and breakfast for more than 6 weeks. So the London figure is, in the last 12 months, that has increased by 781%. So April 22, you had in London, I think about 146 people in B&B. This April, you had 1,287 people. I mean, that's just crazy. Now, there are a number of reasons for that, which are fascinating and awful at the same time. So one of the biggest ones is interest rates. So there are a lot of amateur landlords around who loan 1 or 2 properties for your pension, that kind of thing. And as interest rates have gone up, it's uneconomic and unviable for them to stay as a small landlord. So they've been getting out of it. The rents, you can push the rents up, but you can't push them far enough to cover what your new mortgage payment is. So that's meant a lot less supply. So London's supply of private rented homes has contracted by 40%. And
Wow.
it's going to be the same in Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield, Birmingham, all of our big urban areas where you had lots of private sector homes. We're all in the same boat.
Yeah, it is. And I know we're going to focus on this, but this does bring back the point of how important development is in our sector. But just before we get into the L&Q story, obviously you did a big role with the GLA. And yeah. I just want to understand, you put a big sort of strategy and a lot of key strategies in the capital, such as the London plan. How important was that? And I suppose kind of what's the impact it's had on London as we sit here today?
Yeah. So, I spent almost 10 years working at Greater London Authority, first for Boris Johnson and then for Sadiq Khan. Fascinating. Both of them fabulous mayors in their own way. But the London plan is a wonderful document, and we're very lucky in London because of the devolution we have, and for Manchester and other cities to get that same level of devolution is really important. So the London plan is you're putting in one single document, a statement of intent for the city, how the city is going to grow, how you're going to manage and control development, how you're going to guide development and support the economy. And the key part of that in any big city is housing. So, I think I oversaw probably about 7 different iterations of the London plan. So you do one big one for each mayoral term, and then you do minor alterations. So you were constantly with, it's like painting the 4th bridge. The minute you start one, you start on the next. Yeah. It was brilliant fun, but one of the most difficult conversations you have then with the 32 local authorities in the London area is, how much land have you got for housing? How much housing need do you have? And then you add up all of those figures. And then normally you have a few rows with boroughs. They may have a lot of housing need and a lot of housing land, but they might not want development, or they've got a lot of need and no land, and where are those people going to live? And then the other thing that's interesting, and Manchester will find this, is the relationship between the big city and the areas around it. So Manchester is exactly the same. People commute into the centre of Manchester, but will live in Ribble Valley, or they'll live out in Stockport, or somewhere nice like Bramall or wherever. Yeah. And it's exactly the same in London. So you've got to have conversations with Kent and Essex and other people about, okay, you may not like this, but Londoners will want to live in your place because it's really quite nice and leafy, and there are great train connections. So it was brilliant fun.
Yeah, it sounds it. And like you say, there's lots of iterations of that plan. I presume like the economy has a massive steer on that as well, doesn't it? In terms of kind of appetite for development, but also the availability of land.
Yeah. So I joined City Hall just as the financial crisis was taking hold. So Lehman Brothers had just collapsed. And one of the biggest fears we had as a capital was the financial services industry being on its knees. So a lot of the focus in my work in the early days was around London's economy, making sure that we still attracted overseas investment and that London was still seen as an attractive city. So that was the first part of it. But you very quickly, as we started to recover, it was very clear that a lot of the businesses who wanted to locate in London simply couldn't employ people because they simply couldn't afford to live there. People were paying something like 60% of their wages or salaries on housing costs. So you really had to get a grip of that because otherwise you can kill off an economy. Lots of big cities see that as well. I mean, Manchester trying to recruit staff who are able to live close enough to be able to work for you is still hard. And it's really interesting in Trafford. If you take from one end of the tram in Stratford, Old Trafford, down to Altrincham, the property prices as you get out to Altrincham. Altringham's terrifyingly unaffordable for anybody.
It is.
It's like something like 23 times the average salary, which is more than lots of parts of London, much more.
Yeah.
Not just a London issue.
Yeah, and is that London issue settled at all since you wrote the plan and came together to put the plan in place? Because, you know, COVID had a big impact of people wanting to get out of cities, a little bit of remote working. I do think we've gone back to the office more than people probably expected us to, if I'm honest. But what's been the sort of change in London since COVID from a development and a London plan perspective, would you say?
It's just got even more expensive and even more different. I think it's the main thing. The issue is, and somebody described it to me yesterday as we're living in sort of constant chaos at the minute. So you had Brexit and the impact that was having, particularly in the London economy. Then very quickly you had COVID and the pandemic. You're coming out of that into a fiscal event that caused chaos with the markets. And that is still continuing with the war in Ukraine, inflation, and the tragic events happening in Israel and Gaza at the moment. And it's just you're going from one awful situation to another, and each one of those, for whatever reasons, adds costs. You know, just Lunchtime News is talking about disquiet in the Middle East and its potential impact on oil and gas prices again. So just when you think you can take a breath, it's like, oh, there is something else that's going to affect us. Yeah, so you've got to get used to it, don't you? You've got to be able to navigate a way through chaos and realise that actually probably this is the new normal. So let's just get on with it.
Yeah, and I speak to a lot of chief executives, and I think this year's been one where people have been kind of in a bit of a holding pattern of what's going to happen next. I do believe, I think you're absolutely spot on. This is it. We are in the new normal, and we've got to accept that we could be in this. Because I keep hearing recession next year, recession not happening, and you can't wait for that to happen. We've got to get on with it, haven't we?
Absolutely. And it's really hard for our teams, for our colleagues, because, you know, I'm driving the train. You know, I'm out of the tunnel. I can see the sunny uplands. I know where I'm going. But, you know, everyone else is like stuck in the dark in the tunnel. Now, I hope she knows where she's going. And it's really hard. I'm super resilient. And I've got to make sure that the layers of my organisation are as resilient and able to cope with that change. And I love change, but not everybody does. And it's really interesting to try and get people to accept that change is a constant now. It always was, really, but now it's in your face all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And we were talking about children off camera, and you look at my daughter now and everything's changing all the time, like quicker than ever. And COVID brought us forward years, didn't it, in terms of transformation digitally? Yeah. But just give us a bit of an overview of L&Q as an organisation as we stand here today, because I'm keen to unpick that and then talk about some of the stuff you've just mentioned around resilience and how you run such a big organisation.
Yeah. So we have about 110,000 homes, about 10 to 12,000 of them in the northwest. The majority still about 80,000 in London and the southeast, and then we still have quite a large land holding and a number of homes in the Midlands, between well, actually running in the arc between Cambridge and Oxford. So we have development aspirations of about 3,000 homes per year, but we've exceeded that in the last 2 years. Want to build about 10,000 new homes in the Northwest. Don't want to put a timescale on that because of all the reasons we've just talked about how difficult it is.
Of course.
But really, really interested in doing sort of big urban regeneration in the Northwest, similar to what we're doing in Barking in the edge of London. So yeah, that's kind of us and scale. Biggest thing we're doing at the minute, though, is ahead of any development, is investing in existing homes, because there's been historic underinvestment by us as an organisation over the last decade, and we've got to catch up on that. You'll have seen the Ombudsman's report this summer. A lot of that is related to simply not looking after people's homes the way that we should have been doing. So we're spending about 3 billion at the moment. We're 1 year into that programme. That's fantastic. We've got 10 contractors working really hard, adding all sorts of other value as well. They do all sorts of extra things. We've got one contractor who's sponsoring degrees for our residents.
Amazing.
Scholarship. They're doing up community halls, all sorts of things. So that is kind of our biggest priority, because within that investing in people's homes, we have a massive fire safety bill, and we've got to crack on with that. So we're spending about 450 million on fire safety to tower blocks predominantly, and that work is well underway, but even that will take a number of years. It'll probably take another 5 to 7 years to finish. So yeah, that's L&Q.
It's massive. I mean, you'd mentioned something and I was really keen to pick up on it. You talked about resilience and you talked about making sure your teams had that resilience. How have you cultivated that? You're running a massive organisation. You can't be over all of the detail. I'm sure you'd love to be. But how do you show bravery in the signs of all of these macroeconomic situations that we're in, all these different challenges that we're facing? You've got one of the biggest jobs in the sector. How do you keep confident and brave and resilient in times where, let's be honest, it'd be easy to do, oh, let's just sit on our hands for a few months and see what happens?
And there is an element of that sometimes as well.
I bet.
There was a great BBC drama thing recently about PSNI, the Police Service in Northern Ireland. And there was one character in it who, whenever times were getting tough, he'd say, take a beat, which is like, just take a breath.
Yeah.
Think before you react. So there are two sides to it. There's the sort of official formal thing, which is about layers of assurance and assurance framework that mean when I need to, I can dive right down and figure out what's going on. So for example, this summer, I rang everyone who'd had a severe maladministration judgment from the Ombudsman to speak to them directly to try and understand a bit more about what went wrong, which really helps you at the top of the organisation to understand the bad and the ugly side of what's happening. So that's the formal side. I've got an amazing board, brilliant chair. My board are fantastic. They are a very healthy mix of supportive and incredibly challenging. They've been fabulous over the last 2.5 years that I've been doing this job. The other side of it then is the more human side of it. You've got to be curious. You've got to be resilient. We've talked about it. You also sometimes need a sense of humour. What pandemic? What next? You've really got to keep people, their spirits lifted. As a leader, you've got to be the optimistic one, even if all the data is telling you this is very bad. You read the FT, you're listening to the BBC, whatever it is. You still got to be able to see those sunny uplands and say, "Come on, let's do this." We're working on some really difficult projects, and people are saying to me, "Oh, this is too hard. Let's just give up." No, the prize is too big. Sorting out homelessness for kids in London, whatever it is, we've got to keep going. And we're pink, bright colours,
But obviously, as soon as you show a sign of fear, then your leaders will follow you. That's the problem. You can't do that. Prior to that, obviously, you were heavily involved, and you joined the business in a development capacity and a big role. But you spearheaded a 5.1 billion, and I had to check that fact, development program. Yeah. Tell us about some of the key projects and some of the impact they've had across some of your communities, because that's massive and brave. Really brave.
Yeah. And it's even braver than you think, because we've got an in-house construction team. So we actually run a building company as well as development. So about a third of our homes recently have been built by our in-house construction company. So, apart from the health and safety stuff around that keeps you awake at night, it is brilliant. I've got fabulous people, and you get to control the quality of the product.
Absolutely.
Because, you know that you've got a company you can send in to fix things. We've had some disasters, particularly in the northwest, with Lane End going into administration. Just a bit of a problem for us and many others working in the northwest. But so at one end of the scale, you've got places like Barking Riverside, where we're heading into planning soon to take that from 11,000 homes up to 14,000 homes. Wow. And that includes building a new railway into the area, a new commercial centre with shops, arts activities, parks, schools. We've got one of the very few NVAC systems in the country, which is, when you build these lovely new developments and then the council come along and stick about 16 wheelie bins. It's lovely. Yeah, because there's a wheelie bin for this, wheelie bin for that. Yeah. So we have a vacuum system. So there's one bin outside, and you put your stuff in, and it's sucked into a centre over the other side of the development. It's amazing.
That is amazing. Is that a new thing? I've never heard of that before, ever.
If you come to London, I've got to show it to you. It is
perfect.
Incredible. We had some Australians there last week who were just mesmerised by them. It's absolutely brilliant. And it's so your development looks lovely. People's homes look fabulous. You're not competing with bins to try and push your buggy down the pavement. Brilliant. So that's one end of the scale. And then the other end of it, we've been doing something in London over the last few years that we do want to try and replicate elsewhere, which is the Build London partnership, where we've been working with very small associations and now working with a smaller local authority that wants to build just a handful of homes, and to support them to do the development and try and do a bit of skills transfer with them as well, to understand the development process. Biggest worry for everybody is around risk, whether it's financial risk, build risk, and trying to get them to understand their own appetites for risk and how you mitigate and manage all of that. So we've been working with a lot of small Black and minority ethnic associations in London to really help them. And we've had some fabulous developments. So we've got an all-woman development happening in West London. We've been working with a fantastic organisation called Akaya, who operate in South London and Brixton. It's just that it's been absolutely brilliant. Very challenging, but really brilliant. And then we do everything in between.
Yeah.
We try to do a lot through joint ventures. So we work with people like Barrett's, Taylor Wimpey, Countryside, Mount Anvil, lots of great companies. And there the skills transfer goes the other way. So if you take a company like Mount Anvil, they are amazing at sales and marketing. It's just a whole new level in terms of how they understand the data, what's selling well, how they use that data then to inform things. And my team have learned so much from them, as they have with Countryside, Barrett's.
Yeah, amazing.
And that's really, really brilliant.
How are we going to fix? I've been talking to people this week about this from the private sector. There's a lot of companies coming out of new build housing. It's been well documented, this. Yeah. We're going to need these companies to back our country. And we've got to make that appealing to businesses, because obviously there's a lot of underpricing that goes on to win work, et cetera, et cetera. But how do we create the contractors for the future? Because clearly, it's brilliant that you're building a third of the homes yourself. You're going to need 2/3 of those homes built by someone else, I presume. But how do we encourage the market to want to stay in this sector? Because they then take the risk, and that's a problem, and therefore they end up losing loads of money on these jobs. And I don't see the fix for it personally, because there's more companies coming out of it than going into it at the moment.
Well, I've got some thoughts on this because
Oh, perfect.
one of the big things I'm doing as chair of G15 is thinking about a new government. Well, it's not a party political issue, but there will be a new parliament and a new government of some colour or description. And it's thinking about what does the country need to be able to get the growth that it requires. Now, building housing itself contributes to the economy. It's a fact.
It does.
Yeah, so even if you look at the Local Government Association figures from 2020, if you just build 100,000 social rented, so none of your affordable, none of your for sale, any of that, just social rented, so the equivalent of a council house, it contributes 100,000 new homes, contributes 15 billion a year to the Treasury. So if you are Rachel Reeves or you're Jeremy Hunt and you're trying to think about how do we get the country growing, building homes is a brilliant way to do it.
Yep.
Now, they will say to us, there is no money. Yeah, I get that. But we're spending an awful lot of money in the wrong way on housing. We're spending £7 million a day on, and this is probably going to get a lot of comments afterwards, we're spending £7 million a day on asylum seekers that we have a duty to house. These are people who helped us in Afghanistan. These are people fleeing awful situations in Syria. Yeah. We have to house them. We owe that to them. But we're spending £7 million a day keeping them in hotels. That's a bit rubbish. We're also spending about £2 billion a year on housing benefit to the private sector that if we built social housing, we wouldn't have to spend. It costs, just in London, it's costing the NHS an extra £2 billion a year from poor housing for physical and mental health problems caused by that. Add all of that up, turn it into a building programme. Yeah. And even if there isn't a market for sale homes at this stage and interest rates are still high, you can keep the construction industry going through this time. And you've heard over the years about counter-cyclical building approaches. You do that, you break into that in some way, and here we go. Now, everybody is talking about it. Labour conference last week, Crisis Shelter, the National Housing Federation, Inside Housing and their Build Social campaign. Build 90,000 social rented homes, and that keeps everybody going. And we solve the housing crisis as we go. We're not going to get there quickly. It's not going to be easy, but that's what I keep saying to my team. Just because it's not easy doesn't mean you don't give it a go. So yeah, there you go. That's it.
Yeah, fixed. And how do we bring the skills that we need as well? Because there's going to be a massive skills issue soon. I mean, it's getting worse by the week, let alone the year. But the other thing is people can't find the right skill sets, the right bricklayer, like all of the things that So what are some of the ideas that you've got around how we could fix some of those issues as well?
Yeah. So if we talk to government about an outcome-based approach to this, and you say the outcome you want is no child in bed and breakfast. So then the whole government kind of goes, well, what's my role in fixing that? So you've got, if you think about skills, you've got the education department, you've got whatever Bayes called itself this week, you've got Dewlock, you've got all of these government departments who do a little bit of it. And what you're saying to them is, you all have to contribute to this outcome, which is no kid in B&B, which means you build 90,000 social homes. And you really focus in on it. We're doing a piece of work that's being led by my Vice Chair, Ian McDermott at Peabody, and Ellie Holt, who's going to be the new president of the Chartered Institute for Housing, which is around skills. I'm spending $3 billion on investing in existing homes, $5 billion on developing. I know from those two things what I need. I need roofers. Up until 6 months ago, I had no roofers to look after 80,000 homes in the southeast. So I can tell you now, I need a shed load of roofers. So you talk to your FE sector, you go, I need roofers. I can almost tell you year by year how many I need. Yeah. So it is not beyond the wit of man or woman to just get these figures together. And that's what Ellie's going to try and do for us as part of the G15. Go to the FE sector, go to the Mayor of London and say, here you go, this is what we need. The other thing we've got to do is construction and working in housing and property is bloody interesting. Yep. I was on one of our development sites that we did with Mount Anvil in East London a couple of weeks ago. That involved archaeologists because they found on the site, the original stage that was the model for the Globe and for Curtain Road Theatre where Shakespeare performed his first plays. The old Red Lion Inn in Whitechapel in East London. So you need archaeologists.
Yeah. So broad.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Why on earth wouldn't you work in construction?
Yeah, I agree. But I'm just seeing a decline. We work across private and public sector, and I am seeing companies coming out of it. They've lost their appetite for it. And it's a massive problem if we get the appetite back within the housing associations and then we have no one to build the homes. I mean, it's got to work in tandem.
That's it. And that's why I'm very determinedly keeping that in-house construction team. And we employ apprentices, and we keep that going, grow it organically and in a manageable way. We've got to keep that. But you know what? The industry also needs optimism. So, you know, I was criticising the shadow housing minister in Liverpool last week because he's going into government saying, oh, it's really hard. No, we know that. We need you to say, but yeah, let's give it a go. And that's what we need, some certainty from government. So it was brilliant to see the Labour Party say we're going to build 1.5 million homes over the first term. I would say go for like 5 million over 2 terms or 10 million over 3 terms, whatever, just ramp it up. You've also got to give some certainty in terms of policy, legislation. You know, is rent control a thing or not? All of these things. And everybody talks about the planning system. I think the planning system is absolutely fine as it is, but resource it. Just give local authorities the money they need to be able to resource it.
Do you know you're the first person that said that, and I agree on the planning system. We're just not enough resource. Like, it's pointless saying something's inefficient when it's not got even 50% of the resource it needs. At that point, you can make a call on their efficiency. But how important is that as well, the certainty? Every person I've ever spoken to has said the biggest problem is, forget which government you want to get in. Yeah. The certainty of policy is the big thing that kills plans, visions, business plans. It kills everything because we don't know what's coming in 12 months' time.
Let me give you a real example of this at the minute. The government has said tower blocks need second staircase, and then they left it at that. We've no idea, is that retrospective? When's that coming in? If I'm in planning now and I get planning permission, but even if I build it, if there's a block next door that's built with a second staircase, will my customer think that block's safer just because this one doesn't have a staircase, even though it's got sprinklers? It's not evidence-based, it's not science-based, and it is causing confusion everywhere. So what we all do then is, well, I'll sit back, fold my arms and wait.
Yeah, of course.
You make your mind up.
Well, it's not. Yeah, it's difficult, and I think certainty is important. I mean, it's really important for the bigger housing associations. For the smaller ones, it's crippling because they just don't know what to do next.
Totally.
Talk to us a bit about the major works investment programme, because you know, £3 billion. I can't even comprehend where that would go. But I mean, it's a lot of homes.
How important? Twice as much, I can tell you that.
But how important is it that we get the stock in line with the Decent Homes Standard again? And there's been quite a lot muted around Decent Homes 2.0 and a few other bits. But where do you sit on all of that kind of?
So we're aiming for a Decent Homes Plus standard. Okay. Actually, the Decent Home Standards as it stands is fairly minimal. It doesn't even address damp and mold effectively.
I know, yeah.
So that's a big issue for all of us. We've got to get that sorted. So we will do with that. We'll do things like 22,000 new kitchens, 40,000 new bathrooms. It is massive. New roofs, windows, new doors. We're also going to get to all bar probably about 1,000 of our homes to EPCC level. So we're concentrating on the fabric first approach with Decent Homes. So, because it's important to residents that we try and help the builds get smaller, because the cost of living thing isn't going anywhere. We've got to make it easier for people to live and pay their bills. We will also, with that, we're using sort of an added value approach to the contracts, where linking it to apprenticeships, job opportunities, particularly for our residents, and just make sure that we lever all of that investment to just generate so much more. That's been brilliant. We've awarded 15-year contracts. So what we're saying to those contractors is, you know, unless you are really crap and we have to sack you, which we will sack you.
Yeah.
Be warned. But if you do the right thing by us and by residents, you've got 15 years worth of work with us, which is incredible in such really, really, really difficult times. That means they can invest in skills, they can invest in their future, they can invest in R&D, whatever they need to. They've got 15 years with us. So that's been brilliant.
That is, and it's significant. And I wanted to make a mention to obviously Manchester. From Manchester, the news of the THT thing was a while back now, and obviously getting close to the amalgamation of the two businesses now, aren't we? So 5 years in the making, is that right, roughly? Somewhere in that.
Yeah. So we brought it forward. The board originally asked we'd take 5 years to do it, but as we started it, once you do these things,
of course.
we did it before, and we formally came together on the 1st of April. So we are now, it's L&Q.
And your knowledge of the Northwest is unbelievable. Like how you talked about the tram and how it goes from here to, I'm thinking, I don't even know that I live here. So you must spend a lot of time here.
I was married to my first husband, who I'm afraid passed away, was from Bramall. So I spent a lot of time in very dodgy pubs in Stockport.
Love that. It's not got any better, I don't think. Well, it has a little bit, but yeah, it's not got much better.
Oh, come on, Stockport's amazing. There's that fabulous, there's sort of like heritage buildings that are being done up. And what's happening at the bus station is incredible. And the Mayoral Development Corporation.
Yeah. Well, and to be honest, it's becoming a bit like Altrincham. So I'd imagine it's the next place for big investment because, a lot of people that work for me, they spend a lot of time in Stockport. It's got a really good night scene, apparently. So.
And Altrincham is just so expensive, but that food court by the market.
Altrincham Market's lovely, isn't it?
Really nice, yeah.
So, what's the plan for that now? It's come together officially. Obviously there'll be still some integration, I presume, happening behind the scenes. But where are you up to with it, and what's the future look like for the North?
The future looks incredibly bright and fantastic, and we're very lucky because a lot of our stock in the Northwest is concentrated in Trafford Council area. So we have a brilliant relationship with Trafford Council, and we want to maintain and build on that because we recognise local authorities are struggling at the minute, and we want to do what we can to support that. But on the ground, it should mean no difference for residents in the Northwest. They always had an excellent service from people working for Trafford, and that's continuing. But frankly, we've nicked a load of ideas, and one of the brilliant things over the last 4 years is looking at how wonderful the service was in Trafford and what can we do then with the rest of the country. I'm afraid we've shamelessly nicked staff as well. So our Director of Housing Management lives in Runcorn and runs the national business, 3 days a week from the Northwest, 2 days a week she's in London. It's been such a learning for our organisation. It's little things like smaller patch sizes for housing officers. It's Clean Start. Have you come across Clean Start in Trafford?
No.
Oh, amazing. And it's Clean Start in two ways. So they run our caretaking and grounds maintenance services. But it is looking at people coming out of prison through the probation service. And it's a clean start for those people who've been through the criminal justice system. And my goodness, they're fantastic. Absolutely dedicated, brilliant people. And it has, I think Deborah, who runs it, has worked out with the Home Office, it's saved the state about 20 million in terms of reoffending costs. Now, it works because it's perfectly formed in the Northwest, but I would love to be able to do that somewhere else in the country. It's just so good.
Yeah, absolutely. And how have you found, as a leader, how have you managed to bring Trafford into the business and make them feel culturally aligned? Because the two businesses come together, it's always difficult. But what has been some of the things that you've had to do to try and build that culture that's unique, I presume, in both offices, but still aligned to the central vision?
Well, let me tell you a funny story first. So when we were getting close to alignment, do you remember not the summer just gone, but the summer before? Do you remember there was like a couple of days of 40 degrees?
Yeah, absolutely.
In Manchester. And so we're out near, I think we're down near Timperley in a church hall, and we were doing 4 road shows for all of the Trafford staff, one after another.
Yeah.
And the place had no air conditioning. It was just weird. And so I was there with my exec team, and at the end of each sort of us talking at them bit, we would then walk around and have a chat on each of the tables about some of the issues they were worried about becoming part of L&Q. And the comment I got most was, "Well, you don't sound like a Londoner." I said, "Well, okay, unpack this now. Tell me." And none of us did. And I said, "Well, we thought you were like posh Southerners coming up here." I went, "Well, what do you think the average Londoner is? Most of us in London for economic reasons couldn't get a job anywhere else." And suddenly that broke down, that north-south divide, that we were just a lot of poshos.
Pinstripe suits going up.
Yeah, so that made that, once that happened, it's like, oh yeah, she's okay. And they're okay. And we're not here to asset strip or any other
No, obviously not, yeah.
So that really, really helped. And it's about listening, and it's about understanding, and it's about trying to maintain what's best in the Northwest, while our balance sheet will support eventually the building of a lot more new homes. It supports that investment, because part of that 3 billion is in the Northwest, and it supports all of that. And when you were the size of Trafford, it would have been very difficult to do any of that. But where big is good is we come in and help. But we do that without wrecking the existing ecosystem. That's why the relationship with the local authority is so important to me, and to all of us at L&Q, and just making sure that doesn't get damaged. But the other problem I have, obviously, is we call ourselves L&Q, and occasionally people say, "What's the L stand for?" This London.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting, and it feels like it's gone well from people I speak to up here. It feels like it's gone really well. And honestly, I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago now that I think went live this week, and it was about mergers, and I got so much negative press about mergers. Everyone in the comments, like, mergers are the devil, blah, blah, blah. Talk to me about your experience, because I don't think that's true. I actually think that for some businesses that are really struggling financially, can't build new homes, have big waiting lists, growing populations, it's the only way, if I'm being honest, in some cases.
Well, the first thing I'd say about it is be clear whether it's a merger or an acquisition. And we were very clear with Trafford, given our size and scale, it's an acquisition. It's
an acquisition, yeah.
Acquisition. And once you have that conversation, and it's like, our systems will be used, our governance arrangements, you take, because then it's a sort of take that or leave it, and it's okay if you want to leave it. But there's no point in trying to say to an organisation of 10,000 merging with something of 90,000 that, But actually what happened in reality was we adopted an awful lot of the ways of working of Trafford into the big organisation because they were better, frankly. But mergers can be difficult, but you've got to be honest at the beginning and really honest all the way through. And what happened during the Trafford acquisition was really interesting, in that the economy changed and our fire safety bill changed, and government support for new development changed, and a lot of things changed. And I found myself as new chief exec having to go in and sort of reframe a conversation with the board of Trafford about life has moved on. Therefore, I'm afraid some of the decisions that you thought we were going to make, we're going to have to make different ones now. That's probably the hardest thing I did. That was, yeah.
And would you say that honesty is the thing that's got you through that, just in terms of being really clear all the way through? Because things do change all the time. But yeah, mergers, acquisitions. Do you think there's going to be more of that in the sector? Because there's some real struggling housing associations in the sector at the moment, at small size, that are just not being able to keep up.
Yeah, I think that it's more. I'm more worried about the middle-sized associations, because it's really, really, really tough, and it's tough for everybody. And I think what I do worry about is, if you do want to merge, it's how do you find a partner at the minute where everybody is very risk averse. Yeah. And even looking at our own business plan recently, it's what's our appetite for another acquisition or a merger, and it's like, oh, do you have a lot on? And the regulator will act as matchmaker when they need to, but I think a lot of us need to still be open to the idea. And I'm although the rest of my team might go, oh, come back here, I'm still open to the idea, because I think it's for the sector's good and ultimately for residents.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Not easy.
Yeah, not easy. And just on the G15, obviously we've had Geeta on the podcast. A big year for you personally, taking the role as chair. How have you found it? It's a tough year to start in that role, maybe, or a positive year. Let's be positive. But what's brilliant year. What are you gonna use your tenure for, and what's really important to you in trying to get some of the things that you've talked about probably today into sort of the wider housing market, housing businesses?
So the big thing is getting ready for a new government and working with all politicians to talk about the importance of housing, particularly in London, where we have 1 in 23 kids not having a permanent home. So if you think about a classroom in London of 30 kids, if 1 in 23 is doesn't have a home, and there will be parts of London where the entire class are in temporary accommodation, what's that doing to them? But it's about making the case for housing investment in London is really quite difficult, because whatever we say about it, levelling up has been quite divisive in a lot of ways. It's sort of pitting two geographical areas against each other, which is not really what it's about. It's about levelling up the economy. It's about levelling up people's incomes, salaries, wages. So making the case for investment in housing in London is about the economy. It's about how the whole country's economy can be helped by stopping hemorrhaging money on hotels or the NHS or anything else. That's everybody's benefit. So that's one of my first priorities. The other side of it is about practical work. So rather than just being a group of housing associations who come and together and have a nice chat occasionally, we've kicked off the first real tangible piece of work, which is called Project 123, between ourselves and G15, the GLA and London councils, which is about looking at temporary accommodation, because it's difficult for us, for example, to sell stock at the minute in our outright sales departments. So could we use that to help with temporary accommodation bills in some way and do something practical to help local authorities? So no one's interest if local authorities are on their knees financially either. And then the third big priority for me is around diversity and inclusion, because if you look at G15, we've had a race pledge that is really important to us, because race is a massive issue for us in London. But I'm really interested also in the intersectionality issues around diversity, because, I don't think anyone has a single protected characteristic. You've always got more than one or two. So what are we doing for diversity generally? And again, I'm looking at that from a practical bent. So we've run a brilliant program in London called Accelerate, where we've helped people to improve their qualifications. It's the kind of what next. So what's the networking opportunity? What's the job opportunity on the back of that? Having worked hard to do this, what can we actually do as employers then to make sure that you move on to the next rung in the ladder? And we do that across organizations and across sector, rather than thinking your career is very linear with us.
No, it's really good. And obviously, like you mentioned, Ellie, who's also been on the podcast, and I know she's going to drive some of these things, the skills and all that sort of stuff, pretty hard. It's going to be fab for the sector, definitely. And but on the diversity thing, I think we can still do more. I also think we have a really difficult time in the sector, having worked in recruitment all my career in housing. I think we sometimes are too spotlight management on these things. We sometimes put a spotlight on one thing and forget about the other characteristics. I think we've got to try and find a fix long term rather than just short term fixes to some of these issues. We've done a bit of work, and I think guaranteeing interviews, making sure there's the right development plan, the language we use, the channels that we're using to attract people to our, there's so much that needs to be done.
We've just done the first survey of our exec team at L&Q on social mobility.
Right.
So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that comes back, because you've often been in the room where you might look around the room and make assumptions about people's diversity, but actually we've all been to the same set of public schools, been to Oxbridge, and all think the same way. So I'm really interested in the diversity that a different pathway in life gives you. For example, having people who run development who've actually been brought up on a difficult council estate. How does that make you think? Because most architects are from the top three groups. So let's get some architects who grew up on a council estate and know what it's like to have the bin stores put in the wrong place.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And as we wrap up and some of the things for the future, the big one for me is how do we attract more brilliant people to our sector that is a fantastic place for people to harvest a great career. Everyone falls into it. No one chooses it. I've had one person that chose housing and it's like, whoa. But how do we make it more appealing? Because I think it's the best sector in the world. That said, we're still lacking some skills and we need to be bringing new talent into this sector all the time.
Absolutely. Well, I've got an 18-year-old stepson and
he's coming into housing, whatever he says.
Well, no, he just like, oh God, no, I don't, because all they think is it's really difficult and it's really hard. And I think our career service in this country is absolutely rubbish because we haven't invested in it for years. And we need far more examples. Your podcasts, for example, are great ways of thinking about an exciting career. My development director does work in schools. She's set up a mentoring program for women in construction. Vicky Savage, she's absolutely brilliant.
Amazing.
We just need loads of more of this and less of, things appearing on TV that make us look like we're really crap. Sometimes we are a bit crap, but it's a brilliant career. So actually, one of the jobs I once applied for was Hackney Council, and I think the ad was something along the lines of, this is probably one of the most difficult places to work in London. And I mean, yes, me.
Perfect.
Can't wait to do that. Yeah. So, yeah.
And also, we're not on the channels of younger people necessarily. We're still advertising, and nothing against this, but we're still advertising our roles in the newspapers and in places they're not looking. I mean, let's be honest.
Well, my son tells me L&Q needs to be on TikTok more. And then, of course, he says, but you are on TikTok, Mum, but it's not good because our residents are using TikTok to raise it. TikTok it's today's thing. What's tomorrow's thing? We've just got to keep moving with this, don't we?
I've got to keep moving, yeah. And my daughter said she wanted to be a YouTube influencer, which is a worry because I thought she wanted to be a vet. So we'll see. As we wrap up and appreciate we've run out of time, what are you excited about in the future? Like, just give us a bit of an idea of what are some of the things that you're looking forward to, short to medium term, I suppose.
Well, kind of all of the above, really. I'm 2.5 years into a 5-year change program at L&Q. A lot of residents would say, well, I haven't seen any difference yet. And fair enough, accept that. But I'm starting to see the green shoots of change, and that lifts me because we've done some real change in the organisation. So I'm very optimistic about that. I'm optimistic about whoever the new government is because, whatever party gets in, they'll have a mandate and they'll be ready to go and they will be enthused in some way. And everybody is talking about housing. Yeah. For the first time in my career, every politician is talking about housing, and that makes me feel really optimistic.
Yeah, no, same. And it's an amazing sector to be part of. And I think the more people like yourself that are going to keep driving development through these choppier waters, let's be honest, they are choppier waters, will mean that we get much needed housing into the industry. And that's what we've got to drive forward. But thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and really appreciate you giving us your insights.
I've loved it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Hip. If you'd like to hear more from us, please be sure to follow us on your favourite podcast platform. We are also running a 30-minute clinic free of charge to any clients that want to recruit in a more inclusive way. For more information, please reach out to us on our website, andersonjames.com.